Every choice you make creates a neon echo that resonates through the digital landscape of your life. We follow these echoes to find the stories of survival, hope, and the ultimate triumph of the spirit. Click subscribe now and hear the truth in every single echo. My name is Greer, and I am 29 years old. 8 days ago, my father stood in the doorway of my hospital room while his wife told a nurse I had shoved her 13-year-old son into a metal shelving unit in a fit of jealous rage, and he said nothing to stop her. Not one word. He stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched her tell that story to a stranger in scrubs, and then he went down the hall and made a phone call that was calculated to take apart the one thing I had built that was entirely my own. When I was discharged 2 days later, my coworker Trina was at the curb with her car running. No one from my family came. What they didn't know was that I had seen a real estate folder sitting open on the kitchen counter that morning, before the garage, before any of it. My mother's home address was printed across the top of the first page in clean black type. I had photographed it on my phone in 6 seconds while the coffee was still brewing, and then set it back exactly as I found it. I had 18 years of practice making myself invisible in that house, and I used every bit of it. 7 days after my father left me in that hospital room, all three of them came to my apartment. They came because a 16-year-old boy with a working memory and a mother who raised him right had already told the truth to everyone who needed to hear it. Let me tell you about the house that folder was quietly deciding the future of. The house is on Caldwell Lane in Gallatin, Tennessee, 28 miles from the apartment where I live now in East Nashville. My mother bought it in 1998 with money she saved over 7 years, working as a billing coordinator at a pediatric clinic. She planted the dogwood in the front yard the spring I was born, and named it after nothing in particular, just the tree. She died in the back bedroom in October of 2005, when I was 10 years old and had just started 5th grade and had no framework yet for understanding that a person could simply stop. I have a single photograph of her in the kitchen of that house, standing at the stove with her back to the camera, her hair in a clip, wearing a green pullover I still remember the texture of. She is stirring something. You can't see her face. For years I thought that photograph was the cruelest thing I owned. Now, I think it is the truest. She is mid-motion. She is in the middle of taking care of something. That is who she was every day I knew her, and that is how I tried to remember her. Not at the end, but in the middle of things. My father remarried when I was 15. He brought Lynette into that house in January of my sophomore year, and she came with a son, Rafe, who was 3 years old and had her same dark eyes and her same quick, watchful way of reading a room. I was a teenager, and I was grieving in the sideways, unspoken way that teenagers grieve, and I made a decision somewhere in those first few months that I was not going to make things harder for my father by being a problem. I got very good at not being a problem. I helped with Rafe the way you help with a younger sibling when the adults in the house are tired and distracted, and nobody has asked you, but you can see what needs doing. I drove him to baseball practice when my father forgot. I sat with him at the kitchen table and did homework beside him, which wasn't always my homework because it was community college by then, and I had my own things to manage. But I sat beside him anyway because the shape of someone sitting beside you matters when you are small. When he skinned his knee before looking for his mother, I used to think that was a sign that he trusted Save. I used to think that was a sign that he trusted me. I understand now it was also a sign of what he was already learning to avoid. Lynette was never cruel to me in ways you could point to. She was something else which is harder to name and harder to leave. She was the kind of person who made you feel, gradually and without ever announcing it, that you were a guest in a house you had grown up in, that your grief was an inconvenience, that your presence was a problem she was managing with enormous grace. And wasn't she gracious? And didn't I see how hard she was trying? I saw how hard she was trying. I also saw the credit card statements she slid under magazines when I walked into the kitchen. I saw the way certain conversations ended the moment I came into a room. I saw the 3 boxes of my mother's things that disappeared from the hall closet one spring weekend when I was 22 and working a double shift and came home to find it full of Lynette's out-of-season coats. My father said he didn't know where those boxes had gone. He had been saying he didn't know things for 7 years by then, and I had learned not to push it, because pushing it never changed the answer and only upset him. He wanted peace more than he wanted the truth. I need you to understand that about him before anything else I tell you will make sense. The house has belonged to my father since my mother died. I didn't know until I was 23 that the way they had owned it together, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, meant that her wishes in her will couldn't override what happened to the property when she was gone. She had wanted the house to come to me. She had written it down, but the law didn't care what she had written, because the way the deed was structured, the house passed to him automatically the day she died. He knew this. My Aunt Norma, my mother's younger sister and the only person in my family incapable of looking away from a hard thing, had explained it to me with a gentleness that was really a warning. He can sell it whenever he decides to, she told me. The only thing keeping him from doing it is that he hasn't wanted to. Yet. Yet. She said it quietly, the way you say the word that matters most. I helped with repairs anyway. When the water heater gave out, I covered half. When the gutters needed replacing, I handled it. I told myself it was for the house. I told myself it was for my mother. I understand now that it was also a way of making myself necessary, because a daughter who is necessary is harder to overlook than a daughter who simply lives somewhere in her own apartment and waits to be thought of. The morning everything changed, I drove up from Nashville on a Saturday with coffee going cold in the cup holder and told myself I was coming to help clean out the garage. My father had mentioned it twice the week before. The garage. All those old boxes, it's time to clear it out. I had a key. I let myself in before anyone else was awake. That was when I saw the folder. It was sitting open on the counter right there beside the coffee maker. A manila folder, the tab labeled in my father's handwriting, 415 Caldwell, our address. Inside, the first page, a listing agreement with a real estate firm, a column of numbers I knew the meaning of, and a line for the seller's signature with my father's name typed beneath it. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment. Then I got my phone out of my back pocket and took 6 photographs and set the folder back down and poured my coffee and went to find work gloves in the laundry room because I had come to clean out a garage and that was what I was going to do. Rafe came out around 9:30, still in his sleep shirt, wanting to know if I needed help. He was 13 and had the particular energy of a boy that age, which is to say he was genuinely helpful for about 8 minutes before he spotted an old plastic bin on the top shelf of the metal shelving unit along the back wall and decided it must contain something worth having. It contained his old handheld game cartridges. I know because I found it on the floor later. I didn't know it then. What I knew then was that he was climbing, and the shelving was old, and the wall anchors had been pulling loose from the drywall for 2 years. I had mentioned it twice, and nothing had been done about it. I got to him in about 3 steps. The unit came away from the wall at the top and swung. I grabbed Rafe around the chest from behind and pulled him away from it, and we both went backward and the top corner of the shelving caught me across the left temple as it came down. The sound it made on the concrete floor was the loudest thing I have ever heard in that garage, and I have been in that garage my whole life. Rafe had a friction scrape on his forearm from the shelf edge, a straight red line maybe 3 inches long. The kind of mark you get from sliding against something, not from being thrown into it or grabbed roughly. I noticed it through the ringing in my ears. Some part of my mind had already decided to notice everything. I was on the floor, with my back against one of the fallen shelves and my hand still on Rafe's shoulder, and there was warmth running down the left side of my face into my ear, and I could see Tobin standing in the open side door of the garage. The neighbor's son. He was 16 and had come to pick up the bike Rafe had borrowed. He had been standing in the driveway for, I learned later, almost 2 full minutes, watching Rafe climb and watching me notice and watching me move. He had seen all of it. He had not moved because he is 16, and it had happened fast, and he was still processing it when Lynette came through the interior door from the house. She saw her son's arm, she saw my hand on his shoulder, she saw the blood on my face and on the floor, and she made her decision in about the same time it takes to draw a breath. She grabbed him, Lynette said. Then louder, she grabbed him and she threw him into the shelf. Rafe looked at me. He was scared and his arm hurt, and his mother's voice was filling the garage with something I recognized from 15 years of living in close proximity to Lynette, which was the absolute certainty she brought to every version of reality she decided was true. He looked at her. He looked at me. He said nothing. I do not blame him for that. 13 is too young to choose between a parent who is screaming and a stepsister who is bleeding on the floor. Silence from a scared child is not a lie. It only becomes one when an adult decides to build on it. My father appeared in the doorway. He looked at the floor. He listened to his wife. He watched his son stay quiet. I have spent a lot of time since then thinking about the expression on his face in that doorway. What I keep arriving at is that it was not disbelief. It was relief. He had been handed a version of events he didn't have to examine too carefully, and he took it. The rest of it happened in a hospital, which is apparently where my family goes to do its worst work. The cut took 7 stitches, and I was kept overnight for observation because of the concussion. Rafe's scrape was cleaned and bandaged, and he went home that afternoon. While I was in my room waiting for the wound to be numbed, I could hear Lynette in the hallway telling a different nurse a story about a young woman with a history of resentment and a pattern of hostilities toward her younger brother. She used the word finally, as in she had finally let it out. I lay in that bed and listened to her build a portrait of a woman who did not exist, and I counted the ceiling tiles, and I thought about my mother's folder on the kitchen counter, and I thought about the photographs on my phone, and I thought about that specific red line on Rafe's forearm that told anyone willing to look at it exactly what direction he had been moving when it happened. My father came to my room once. He stood in the doorway. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I thought, just ask me. 4 letters, ask me what happened. He didn't ask. He said he needed to step out. He said it would be better if I gave Lynette some space while things were raw. Then he left. He did not ask me one single question, not one. That is the thing I keep returning to even now, not the leaving, the not asking. The next morning, he called my supervisor at the County Department of Children's Services, where I have worked for 4 years as a case manager. He reported a domestic incident involving a minor. He used my full name. He gave them my employee ID number, which meant he had looked it up, which meant it was not an impulse. A case manager with an open investigation for harming a child does not keep their cases, does not keep their license. The accusation was aimed at the exact center of the life I had built, and it landed exactly where it was aimed. I was placed on administrative leave by 9 o'clock the next morning. I have spent a great deal of time since then thinking about that phone call, about how long he must have had my employee ID written down somewhere, about whether Lynette had made the call herself, or whether he had done it while she stood beside him. I have decided it doesn't matter which. He knew it was happening and he did not stop it. Trina was at the curb when they wheeled me out. She drove the 28 miles to Nashville without filling the silence, which is rarer than most people realize. She walked me up to my apartment and made tea and left when I asked her to without making me feel bad for needing to ask. In the car, I had pulled up the county property records on my phone and sat with them in my lap. The listing history was right there, the way public records always are, patient and indifferent, and entirely unconcerned with what they are handing you. The agreement had been signed 3 weeks before the Saturday of the garage. 3 weeks before Rafe ever set foot on that shelving unit, Lynette had already arranged to sell my mother's house. The accident had not created her opportunity. It had only handed her the one piece she hadn't had yet, a reason to remove me from the room, suspend my ability to object to anything, and keep me occupied with something other than a listing agreement. She hadn't needed me to be hurt. She had needed me quiet and discredited and stripped of standing. I sat at my kitchen table with the property records printout and my hospital discharge papers side by side. 2 documents, 2 dates. The space between those 2 dates was the whole story. I photographed the wound before the swelling peaked and the bruising spread, so there would be a record of what 7 stitches above your eyebrow looks like on the 2nd day. I put everything in a folder. I wrote on the outside in handwriting that was steadier than I felt. Keep everything. Say nothing yet. Norma called me that evening. She had already heard from 3 different relatives because Lynette had spent 48 hours working the phones and getting to the family before anyone else could. Every version she told was slightly different from the last. To my uncle, she said I had shoved Rafe deliberately. To a cousin, she said it had been rough and chaotic, and I had not been careful. To Norma, not knowing my aunt was already on my side, she made the mistake of saying, we had both simply lost our balance and fallen. My aunt wrote all 3 versions down. Then she called Bryn. Bryn is Tobin's mother. She is a clinic nurse, 43, and the kind of woman who, when something lands wrong, sits with it until she understands exactly what is wrong about it before she opens her mouth. She had not called anyone yet, because Tobin had come home from the garage, shaken and quiet, and she had been waiting to understand what she was dealing with. He saw the whole thing. Tobin had told her the night it happened, and then he had gone quiet. In the particular way, that means a teenager is already carrying something an adult put down on them. What Bryn found, when she checked his phone that evening the way she had always done, not to catch him, but because she had promised herself years ago she would stay awake, to the things teenagers didn't say out loud, was a message sent to his group of friends, sent within 7 minutes of leaving the garage before any adult had had the chance to hand him a different script. Before Lynette had finished her first version of events. The shelf tipped on Rafe and his stepsister grabbed him out of the way, and the corner got her in the head. It looked really bad. She was bleeding a lot. A 16-year-old being honest with his friends in the only register available to him in the first 7 minutes before the story became a weapon. Bryn sat her son down. He told her he didn't want to be in the middle of it. He told her Lynette scared him. She said, "You don't lie for adults, and you don't stay quiet to protect one. You tell the truth even when it costs you something. That's what being brave looks like at your age." So when Lynette finally called the house, expecting a boy who would fold under an adult's certainty, she got instead a 16-year-old sitting at his kitchen table, with his mother standing behind his chair, and the truth already settled in his mouth. She didn't shove him, Tobin said. She grabbed him to keep him from going down with the shelf. He was holding on when it tipped, and she pulled him back, and the corner got her. I was standing in the doorway for almost the whole thing. I watched it happen. Lynette told him he was confused. He turned his phone around so she could read the screen, the message, the timestamp. 7 minutes after he left the garage, before any ambulance, before anyone had told him anything about what to think or what to say. I heard from Norma later that Lynette said the word confused 3 times in that conversation, each time with slightly less force, the way a word deflates when the person saying it already knows it has stopped working. And my father, standing beside her, understood all at once what he had done. He did not call me that night. He sat in the Callahans' driveway alone with it for a long time. Then he drove the 28 miles toward Nashville because his family needed something from me. I want to be exact about that. They did not come because he was sorry. They came because the story was falling apart, and the relatives were asking pointed questions, and there was an open investigation at my workplace that had begun, quietly, to point back toward the people who had filed it. They came because they needed me to call it a misunderstanding and make everything stop. Norma told me later that, in the car on the way over, Lynette had laid out the reasonable-sounding plan. Greer just needs to call her supervisor and explain. She says it was an accident, and we all move forward. When Lynette reached into her bag for her phone, the real estate folder slid out onto the seat between them. Neither of them reached down to pick it up. I had watched the car pull into my lot from the window. I had time to set my face the way 15 years of practice had taught me to set it. My father rang the bell. That surprised me, actually, the fact that after 30 years, he felt he needed to ring the bell. I opened the door. Lynette spoke first. She used the soft, careful voice she reserved for asking things she already knew she didn't have the right to ask, the voice that made everything sound like a generous offer being extended to someone who didn't deserve it but was being helped anyway. She said, "We could put all of this behind us." She said all I had to do was make one phone call and explain to my supervisor that the whole thing had been an accident. She said there was no reason to make things complicated. She said, and I noticed the exact order, "The house is already done, and there's nothing anyone gains from bringing that up now." My father was looking at my doormat. When I said nothing, Lynette's voice thinned the way it always thinned when she was losing patience with someone who wasn't cooperating. She said, "I was going to throw away my family over a misunderstanding." She said, "Did I have any idea how that was going to look?" There it was, not grief, management. My father found his voice. He used it to tell me that the neighbor boy had come forward, that Tobin had explained what he had seen. He said it to my doormat without lifting his eyes to my face, and that told me everything I needed to know about why he was saying it. He believed me now. Not because I was his daughter and he had known me for 29 years and those years should have meant something. He believed me because a teenager and a phone had left him nowhere else to stand. He had needed no proof at all to call my supervisor and open an investigation into my career. He needed a witness to come back to my door. The street was quiet. I let the silence sit there for a moment, because some things need to be surrounded by silence so that everyone present can hear exactly how much weight they carry. I said, "I know what Tobin saw. I was there." My father looked up for the first time. I said, "You called my supervisor before you asked me a single question. You knew my employee ID number. That wasn't an accident. That was a decision, and you made it while I was still being kept under observation. And it was aimed at the one thing in my life that I built on my own, without any help from anyone in this family." Lynette opened her mouth. I kept going evenly because I had been quiet for 8 days, and I was not going to rush now that it was finally my turn. "The listing agreement was signed 3 weeks before that Saturday," I said. 3 weeks before Rafe ever touched that shelf, the house was already on the market. The sale closed in 5 days. It closed while I was in a hospital bed. The buyer is your friend Vanda, and she paid $60,000 under asking price because everything was arranged in advance, including the speed and including the timing. I had the county property records on my kitchen table. I didn't go get them. The way my father's jaw moved told me they had known I would find out and had been hoping I wouldn't say it directly to their faces. Rafe had not spoken the whole time they were standing there. He was a half step behind both adults, and when I looked at him, really looked at him, I could see what it had cost him to stand on that porch and know what he knew. He said, very quietly, "I told the truth. I texted my friend right after it happened, before anyone told me what to say. That's what actually happened." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the garage and about how scared he had been and about the particular position a child is in when the honest thing and the safe thing point in completely different directions. I thought about the half beat of silence before he hadn't spoken, and I thought about how 13 is too young to be placed in that position by the adults who are supposed to be safest. I said, I know you did." Then I looked at my father. "You didn't ask me what happened," I said. "You decided, and then you made a call designed to take everything from me, and you did both of those things before a single question had left your mouth. You found a witness who could make you believe me. I didn't need a witness to tell you the truth. I just needed you to ask." He opened his mouth. I put my hand on the edge of the door. I said, "Too late." I didn't slam it. I closed it slowly and completely, and I stood on my side of it for a moment and breathed. Consequences arrived in their own order over the weeks that followed, and there is a quiet justice in watching each one find its way to the right address. My supervisor received the documentation, my discharge records, with the injury timeline, Tobin's written account, the timestamp on the group chat message, and the listing agreement showing the sale had been arranged weeks before the incident. She told me carefully, when she called to tell me I was reinstated, that the investigation had never looked favorable for the person who initiated it. My license and my caseload came back in a letter that arrived on a Thursday morning. The very thing that had been aimed at me with precision was returned to me by the same system that had taken it, on the strength of the papers I had been careful, in the worst week of my life, to keep. The real estate firm launched an internal review when a title examiner flagged the speed of the closing of disclosing and the relationship between seller and buyer. I don't know exactly how that resolved. I know it became a subject Lynette did not want to discuss. Norma hosted the family's Easter gathering the way she always had. The invitation went out as it always did. Lynette's name was not on it, and every adult in the family understood the arithmetic of that omission without a word being spoken aloud. My father was invited. He didn't come. Rafe texted me 3 weeks after the porch. "Can I call you sometime?" I waited 2 days before I answered. Not to punish him, because some things need to settle before you open the door to them again, and I wanted to be steady when I did. I called him on a Sunday evening, and Norma was on his end of the line, which I later learned he had arranged himself. A 13-year-old who thinks to arrange that is a 13-year-old who is already learning how to protect himself. That makes me proud of him and breaks my heart a little at the same time. We talked for 40 minutes, baseball, a show he was watching, eventually, in a smaller voice, the garage. He said he was sorry he hadn't spoken up right away. I told him I knew why he hadn't and that I didn't hold it against him. I told him the door between us was open and that it was open to him, not to the people who had put him in that position. He said, "Okay," quietly. The way you say something when you are relieved, in a way you weren't entirely sure you had the right to be. My father left a voicemail the second week of April. It was long. His voice broke in it more than once. He said he should have asked. He said it was the one thing, the only thing, he should have done, and he hadn't done it. He said he was sorry. I listened all the way through. I saved it in a folder on my phone. Not forgiveness, not the beginning of something repaired. Just a document. A record of what he finally managed to say, 7 days and one house too late. I have not called him back, that not yet belongs to me, and I am in no hurry with it. My mother's things are on a shelf in my living room, a green ceramic mug, a small framed photograph, a birthday card she wrote in her own handwriting the last year. She was well enough to write one. I did not put them in storage. I put them where I can see them from the couch, at eye level, the way you keep things you have decided deserve to be seen. I drove past the house on Caldwell Lane once in May, on my way back from Norma's. There was a dumpster in the driveway, and the front landscaping had already been torn out. The dogwood was gone. I don't know exactly when they took it down. I sat in the car across the street for less than a minute, and then I put it in drive and I kept going. I had carried that address like a second name for 19 years. I thought losing it would feel like losing her all over again. It didn't. It felt like setting down something very heavy that I had been holding. For so long I had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be mine to carry alone. She is in the green mug. She is in the birthday card in her own handwriting. She is in the way I moved across that garage floor in 3 steps, without deciding to, toward a boy who was about to fall. They can sell the coordinates. They cannot sell what was actually there. I still work my caseload. I still bring files home some evenings and spread them across the kitchen table. My whole job is to see things clearly and say them out loud and not look away from the hard version of what is actually happening in a room. I am better at that job now than I have ever been, for reasons I did not choose but have decided to use. Some mornings, when a child in one of my cases does something that takes real courage, tells the truth when it costs them, says the honest thing to the adult least willing to hear it. I think about a 16-year-old standing in a garage doorway and a 13-year-old sending a message to his friends in the first 7 minutes before anyone had gotten to him. That is who both of them were when no one was shaping them. That is who I am still trying to give Rafe room to be. The door between us is open. He knows where I am. That is more than I expected to be able to say, and it is enough.